Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the Knights of Anor Londo, mainly focusing on the very important and iconic knights from Dark Souls 1 and where they ended up across the sequel games and that type of thing. This will probably be the first in a series of videos I do about the gods of Anor Londo and their various servants. But that's enough preamble for now. Let's get right into it. So right off the bat, there's several lesser types of knight that you're going to encounter in Dark Souls 1. There's Baldur and Baronique knights who, for the most part, never made it to Anor Londo in any large number. There was one Baldur knight who presumably became a Blade of the Dark Moon, and a couple of Baroniques made it into the Painted World of Ariamis, while unfortunately their most famous member, Black Iron Tarkus, fell from the rafters above after slaying the Iron Golem of Sen's Fortress. These aren't really knights of Anor Londo, though. They're just knights that happen to be in the game, and a couple of them happen to be located, technically, in Anor Londo. Now, as for the City of Gods' own guardians and knights, they had various different flavors. There were the Silver Knights, who were the guardians of this ancient city and veterans of the Dragon Wars. They essentially made up the bulk of Gwyn's forces when he went to war with the Everlasting Dragons. Now, the most hardcore of the Silver Knights went on to wield massive weapons and fight a war against the demons of the Chaos Bed created by the Witch of Izalith, one of Gwyn's companion from the campaign days who had went wonderfully awry. Now, most of these knights were burnt black and became known as the Black Knights, and even more were burned when they followed Gwyn into the Kiln of the First Flame so he could burn himself to keep the Age of Fire going. There's a reason why the Black Knights are iconic. I mean, look at them. They've got the skinny head, the giant weapon, and they've got this backstory that says they essentially walked into hell willingly and survived, just burnt. We can see that even by the events of Dark Souls 3, some of these Black Knights still carry on their war against the demons, or at least their new replacements, the Gru. Others can be found in a shrine that's either trapped in an age of darkness in the previous age, or something more confusing. Anyway, the surviving Silver Knights who weren't burnt black and didn't go fight a war against the demons continued to guard Anor Londo until they either all died off eventually or went hollow because they were essentially replaced by illusions by the time of Dark Souls 1. So the Silver Knights may not use giant melee weapons like the Black Knights, but they're famous for their giant archery skills, and I literally mean giant. They use these massive great bows to fire literal spears at any who dare attempt to ascend Anor Londo, a job they still continue to do even by the time of Dark Souls 3, although by that point in the story a good portion of them appear to have possibly been corrupted by Aldrich or Pontiff to serve as guardians for the new regime. At least that's the running theory. The only three non-afflicted and also non-responding Silver Knights in Dark Souls 3 are found in the notorious painting room guarding the art of previous ages and some rare gear that once belonged to the city's final protector all the way back in the old days. The knights appear to be securing this room, possibly even keeping it hidden from the forces of Pontiff Sullivan, who has essentially taken over the Dark Moon city of the gods, as well as what was left of Anor Londo by the time of 3, and fed its former ruler Gwendolyn to Aldrich, a blob of sludge who linked the fire in a previous age. It's a whole thing. But look, we're 3 minutes in and we're not even through all the lesser knights. I mean, there was also the Dark Moon Knights led by Debras Babe. Anyway, my point is there's lots of knights in the game, and even more so in the sequels, but today I'm going to try to focus on the ones that served Gwyn and the other gods of Anor Londo, the iconic named knights. Side note, there's a comic somewhere that says Oswald the Pardoner was actually a Black Knight before a crow landed on his shoulder and he found Velka, as it were. I don't think it's canon, but it was something I found while researching Black Knights. Thought it was worth mentioning. Anyway, let's move on to the real purpose of this video. So first and foremost, we have the famous 4 Knights of Gwyn. Similar to the 5 riders of Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, these individuals were the best of the best that Anor Londo had to offer in terms of fighters, and they very much earned their legendary statuses long before the events of the game begins. In fact, some of them are even long gone by this point. In fact, that brings me to the first entry on this list. Ornstein, the Lion Knight and first warrior of the Sun's Firstborn, or the Nameless King as he would later be known. Ornstein continued to serve Anor Londo for a time even after his master was banished by Gwyn and had his name stricken from history. Ornstein himself stuck around for a while serving the gods of Anor Londo, but at some point he appears to have just up and left. I figure he presumably jumped ship after Gwyn left to go link the fire and the various gods of Anor Londo began departing for parts unknown, like Guinevere dipping off with her husband Flan to go found the Hyde's Tower of Flame, or Lindeld, or both. Anyway, an illusion was created to stand guard alongside the last true defender of the city, but the real Ornstein would seemingly become a simple drifter, perhaps searching for his master who had been erased from history, or like I said, just searching for himself, searching for some greater purpose, or some dragons to kill, or some dragons to befriend. It's really anybody's guess what he was doing. Maybe he was still seeking out some remnants of the gods of Anor Londo to serve, which could explain why he or his armor turned up where it was sighted next. So in Dark Souls 2, or at least by the events of Dark Souls 2, a figure resembling Ornstein, I believe it's him, was spotted in the Hyde's Tower of Flame, presumably hunting the wyverns that came to roost in the sunken city. Now this is all just pure speculation, but if this is Ornstein and Hyde's Tower is the city that was founded by Guinevere and Flan after they departed Anor Londo, then I do suppose it's possible that Ornstein may have just accompanied them, and the illusion guarding the illusion left behind back in Anor Londo was, there to keep up appearances, and presumably to test worthy undead, worthy pawns, if you will. Anyway, years pass by, and as the new fire fades, the darkness gains strength, which results in Ornstein here developing dark hex-like magic in the place of his old lightning miracles, at least by the events of Dark Souls 2. This old Dragon Slayer character, who may or may not be Ornstein. And again, the alternative is that this is just an imposter who found an old set of Ornstein's armor and just likes hexing, but to me that seems lame. It very well could be the case, and maybe it's never meant to be decided what this is that we're dealing with. It could be that at some point Ornstein got lost to the Abyss, and the Abyss spit him back out like it did with Artorias. Again, I'm not denying the plausibility of the fact that it might not be Ornstein. I just don't really care for the conclusion. I think it makes more sense for it to just be him, some corrupted, changed version of him. Whether or not he died here in the Hyde's Tower of Flame for good is up in the air, since he's an optional boss just like how Gwendolyn was in Dark Souls 1. We could kill him, but we know he survived at least up until the point of Dark Souls 3, so he could get eaten by my guy Big Dritch. So I don't think it's crazy to assume that Ornstein could have survived Dark Souls 2 and continued searching for the Nameless King all the way up until he found Archdragon Peak. It makes sense to me. I know that's solid evidence, right? Well, it makes sense to me, thus it must be true. Like I said, first and foremost, this is all just speculation. I am just theorizing here. Ornstein was the Nameless King's first knight, a dragon slayer like his master, but we know that the Nameless King eventually had some kind of change of heart and allied himself with the ancient dragons, only for his father to have him exiled and have his name stricken from history in response to this great betrayal. We also know that Ornstein could potentially still be alive, and we curiously find a bunch of his belongings in Archdragon Peak after we defeat the Nameless King. Personally, I do think that the story speaks for itself. Ornstein found Archdragon Peak and found his long-lost master and shed his worldly belongings to become a little reindeer dragon man. Makes perfect sense. Almost forgot to mention that a spare suit of Ornstein's armor, this one made of blackened iron, was later possessed by some pilgrim butterflies that managed to make use of the suit's latent lightning capabilities, and it sort of served as this guardian to Lothric's Grand Archive in Dark Souls 3. Like many bosses, it was defeated, and eons passed, and the armor then sank all the way down to the edge of the world and found its new home in the abyssal swamp of the Ringed City, where it once again gained autonomy. It did not, however, regain its boss health bar. Anyway, let's move on to the next entry on this list, Artorias, the Abyss Walker and Slayer of the Dark Wraiths. Definitely one of the more famous characters of the series. It's not hard to see why. He has the coolest pet ever and some pretty sick looking armor. He also made a covenant with abyssal creatures so he could stride their domain and slay them, so again, that's pretty cool. His actions, of course, inspired many in the following centuries and cycles to continue his work, the Abyss Watchers and the Farron followers, namely, who viewed themselves as sort of Artorias' successors. Now, Artie here posthumously takes credit for a lot of stuff that was actually done by a time-traveling chosen undead, like saving Ulasil, defeating Manus, and rescuing Dusk. It's not really his fault, though. The mushroom is the one who's spinning a fable to glorify this guy. She's clearly got some agenda at play when it comes to glorifying the deeds of Gwyn's knights, while at the same time allowing the villagers to blind one of their number. You know, the Cheshire Cat did try to tell us early on, before we even time traveled, that the story of Artorias heroically saving Ulasil was nothing but a fairy tale, not what actually happened, no matter what all these people are saying. The cat knows this because she assisted the actual hero, some nameless undead, in the rescue of her buddy Sif, Artorias' pet dog that he rather irresponsibly led into the abyss, in an act that he was woefully underprepared for. Luckily for Sif, Artorias at least had the good decency to make up for this mistake by sacrificing his shield to protect Sif from being consumed by the abyss completely, an act that probably directly correlated to Artorias' own corruption at the hands of the abyss, and likely Manus as well, given the mangled state of his body when we finally fight him. Artorias, I mean, not Manus. Now, bits of the true story and the fable grow into one, and by the days of Dark Souls 3, Artorias is only remembered as the Wolf Knight. His memory is kept alive by a group of dudes that bound themselves together through their shared partaking of wolf blood, a great wolf like Sif to be exact, so they've even adopted the wolf imagery as well, and they sort of improved on Artorias' formula. They were known as the Abyss Watchers, and together they would level kingdoms the minute they showed a sign of falling to the abyss. They were followed by a vanguard known as the Farron followers, who essentially cleaned up the mess and carnage that the Abyss Watchers left in their wake, and the Abyss Watchers themselves, as a group, went on to link the flame in their own age, so I imagine the followers had a lot of work to do after the Watchers were no longer in play. It's worth noting that the Cheshire Cat Alvina's forest hunters are also seemingly still around in the form of the Farron watchdog, so it's nice to see a continuation of both her work and Sif's, since the forest hunters were essentially assigned to protect Artorias' tomb. But I believe that's all I had to say about Artorias, aside from his lack of noticing the fact that Kieran was clearly in love with him, but we'll get to that when we get to her entry. So now we're on to Goff, the giant archer, the leader of Gwyn's Dragon Archer Brigade, and a deadly shot to the surprise of absolutely no one. He was sent to Ulasil alongside Artorias and Kieran to deal with the spread of the abyss, and he likely wanted to take a shot at Calamite, the fabled black dragon of the royal woods that even the gods of Anor Londo were afraid of. Unfortunately, he wouldn't get the chance, at least not yet, because after everything went bad for Artorias, Goff found himself blinded and imprisoned by the residents that he was sent to protect, the residents of Ulasil Township, sort of a bit like Yorm, who we'll talk about in a Lord Cinder video in the future. The citizens stuck a bunch of resin, some black, really sticky, thick resin, in his helm so he couldn't see, and then locked him in his tower, where he began creating his iconic carvings that contained his voice. They were essentially imbued by his really cool sounding voice, and these carvings would essentially be his legacy. He plays a significant part in the Artorias DLC, where he tells you a lot about his former comrade. He also finally gets to take a shot at the Black Dragon Calamite and brings him down for the player to actually have a fair fight with. Goff also seems to have served as the inspiration for a certain giant archer of a particular undead settlement who is seemingly carrying on his legacy, or his duty of protecting the legacy of Princess Dusk in the form of the white birch trees. See, I call this guy the I help anytime guy, and he truly does help anytime once you're his friend. His goal is to protect the white birch trees which sprouted from the remains of Princess Dusk's staff. There's, I believe, 3 of these trees, and his tower in the undead settlement is able to view all 3 of them, where he rains down an ungodly firestorm on any monster or undead who goes near them who aren't his friend. Maybe he's Goff's descendant, but let's move on. Alright, so we're on to Kieran now, the assassin who's in love with Artorias. Now, not much is known about her. She's got some cool weapons, the dark gold and silver tracers. Cool armor, too. And when it comes to these games, that's really all you need to like a character. Cool weapons, cool armor, cool voice actress. But I think Kieran even goes beyond that. I like her because despite being Gwen's top assassin who likely engaged in a rather grim line of work, she isn't some cold, unfeeling badass. She still very clearly has her humanity, and maybe that is a sign of her dark line of work. But we know that she ultimately dies at Artorias' grave with a belly full of unrequited love and sadness. Ultimately, that's effectively her whole character. She is the embodiment of unrequited love, of this person who was supposed to be a cold, unfeeling badass, but felt her emotions too much, at least for this one individual who didn't feel the same way back. She had this great love for a larger-than-life hero that was also her comrade, and unfortunately for her, this love was never returned, at least as far as she knew. I like it as a nice contrast to her implied profession, and most of all, I like the idea that she kept Sif company, at least for a time, at his master's grave. I definitely wish we learned a bit more about her, but she works well in this mysterious way, if you ask me. I mean, the less we know about her, the better, because we know all we really need to know. Sometimes characters need to just be mysterious, and she managed to do so in a way that didn't come off as tropey in any way. Now, the more classic, quiet, stern, royal assassin style character would definitely be the Dark Moon Knightess that leads Gwendolyn's Blades of the Dark Moon, although I only bring her up as a point of comparison with Kieran. Characters with similar jobs but completely different dispositions. Anyway, these were the 4 knights of Gwen: Ornstein, Artorias, Goff, and Kieran. And each member was given a ring that corresponded to them, and these rings definitely withstood the test of time, as we saw in Dark Souls 3, or at least some of them did. Goff was given the Hawk ring, Ornstein was given the Leo ring, Artorias the Wolf ring, and Kieran the Hornet ring, and these sort of symbolized them as the top 4 knights of the land, or at least Gwen's favored. But they were in no way the only famous knights to serve the Lord of Light in his City of the Gods. There were some other more well-known and some lesser-known figures that we're also going to talk about today. So I like to view these guys as the Royal Court Knights. And we'll start with my personal favorite, Smo, the Cannibal Executioner. Cool, yes, misunderstood, maybe. I personally think he can be looked at as a commentary on medieval executioners who were ostracized for their grisly line of work, but provided a wide variety of public services. Like back in the day, you would go to the executioner to help you reset your dislocated arm and shit like that. Like, these guys did all kinds of different work outside of just executing people, because it's not like an executioner was going to be executing somebody every day. But even though they were these helpful members of society, they usually had to have a house that was outside of town, and they usually had to keep to themselves because not many people wanted anything to do with them because of that line of work that they had. Or at least that's what I learned while playing Kingdom Come Deliverance. But yeah, I think that's why Smo gets a bit of a bad rap. Sort of a victim of the superstitions of the time and world that he lives in. I think that the fact that he's labeled as a cannibal is sort of an example of that. So Smo ground down the bones of his execution victims into a powder and mixed this dust in with his food when he would eat. He used it as seasoning, if you will. Which, hey man, my dogs are into that. They might not be human bones, but they are bones. But this is essentially why he became known as the infamous cannibal executioner. Not because he straight up ate people.
Has he ever eaten anybody that you know of?
I don't think so.
No, but I mean, it'd be pretty cool if he did, don't you think?
Yeah, that is really cool.
Hey, think about the dedication you gotta put into eating a human body, man. If he's got that kind of commitment, imagine.
So maybe the guy was a bit of an eccentric. And maybe he did take a particular delight in executing people, but that could just be because of the treatment he received by the population at large. And there was also the fact that he was a giant, and sure, Goff served on the Royal Knights of Gwen no problem and was a giant, but outside of him, though, the giants we see in Dark Souls 1, be it in Sen's Fortress or Anor Londo, all seem to take this sort of subservient role to the gods, so it could be that Smo just felt that it was his duty to serve them. Like the other giants who were smiths, sentinels, and archers, But since the giants were for all intents and purposes secondary citizens in Anor Londo, they were viewed with a bit more suspicion than the average resident. And there was no real reason for this suspicion. The giants didn't do anything to warrant it. I think if anything, it might have been a result of how odd and different they looked from the other people of Anor Londo. I mean, not for nothing, look what the people of Ulasil did to Goff, one of Gwyn's 4 knights, and he's like the nicest guy ever. So for all we know, Smo could also be super nice, and he could just be a guy who really enjoys his job. Overall, the gossip that surrounds Smo and all the notoriety that he amassed works as a great sort of example of how medieval executioners were subject to the superstitions of the communities that they served and the rumors that would arise about them as a result of it. Anyway, Smo may be known as the cannibal executioner of the gods, but he was also the last true defender of Anor Londo. He's famous for his duo boss fight with Ornstein. He's been abandoned essentially by all of his masters, as we saw in Dark Souls 1. Well, all of them except for Gwendolyn. Smo is basically a dog that Gwendolyn feels bad for, essentially. He's like a stray that he took in. Although despite his rather notorious reputation, Smo actually seems like a noble guy, at least in terms of his allegiance to Anor Londo, or perhaps it's out of some misguided need to prove himself as worthy as the 4 knights were. I think he knew deep down that he would never be adequately honored for being the last true knight of Anor Londo, just like he was never properly recognized for being just as worthy as they were. But that didn't stop him from doing his duty. He stuck around even as everybody else gradually left until only he and a handful of others were the only actual guardians that remained outside of the illusions. I think that while it may not have been the intent at the time that this cutscene was made, we can sort of retroactively reinterpret the cutscene that plays when one of them falls in the boss fight first. As we probably all know by now, if Ornstein goes first, then Smo angrily smashes his corpse with his hammer and absorbs him rather unceremoniously. This could be because Smo knows Ornstein is just an illusion, something that might actually irritate Smo, who's actually there in the flesh risking his life. You know, putting it all on the line to prove himself. And this would be illustrated by the psychotic bashing. Now, on the flip side of this, if Smo falls first, then we see Ornstein sort of gently place his hand on Smo's corpse and show him a moment of honor and gratitude before he's absorbed. I think this was Gwendolyn paying his final respects and, most importantly, recognition to Smo in his dying moments before he's consumed by the illusion completely for round 2. You know, so as to serve as an adequate test for the possible chosen undead. You gotta love these gods of Anor Londo. Just about everybody is a pawn to them. Anyway, that's how I sort of reinterpreted those cutscenes. I think Gwendolyn, the last god of Anor Londo, recognizes that Smo deserved this brief send-off, this slight validation as the last defender of the City of the Gods before his death. I mean, this is a guy who wasn't allowed to be one of the 4 knights, no matter how hard he tried, and it was mainly because of the nature of his work and the eccentricities of his person, but he's the one who stuck around. He's who rose to the occasion. The famous 4 knights of Gwyn were gone. Artorias, Goff, and Kieran all never returned from Ulasil, and Ornstein went off on some sort of soul-searching vision quest. The only one who was left to guard this largely empty city of the gods was the cannibal executioner himself, the failed knight. The people of Anor Londo have no way of even comprehending the level of sacrifice Smo is making, let alone all the build-up and meaning surrounding it.
I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts.
All he had were the illusions and, of course, the demons, who I'm sure were quite talkative. I guess he could have talked to the giant blacksmith as well, but you get what I mean. Anyway, as the eons passed by, he was slowly forgotten about, and by the events of Dark Souls 3, he doesn't seem to have left behind much of a legacy outside his hammer and his armor. His hammer is interestingly enough found in the famous art room where the 3 remaining non-corrupted Silver Knights are guarding a bunch of gear, including the iconic hammer. His armor, on the other hand, is curiously only available after you kill Aldrich, the Lord of Cinder, which could mean that Smo himself wound up consumed by this big ball of sludge. Or, and I think this is the more likely possibility, is that Aldrich possibly dreamed of Smo in the same way that he dreamed of Priscilla as he was eating Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn would have thoughts of Smo. He might even, hold him in a sort of high regard. And dreaming is kind of Aldrich's whole thing outside of eating. He's sort of like the Dark Souls David Lynch. He can dream things into reality and even weaponize them like we saw with Priscilla's life hunt scythe. And I think this same type of dreaming resulted in Smo's armor being found in the inventory of the Shrine Handmaiden as soon as he's defeated. And that is of course baseless speculation, but it's fun. Now the other famous knight of Gwyn's royal court would have to be Havel, the bishop and rock. Dwayne the Hard Havel, as he's known in some circles. One of Gwyn's original battlefield companions and good friends, Havel hated magic, dragons, and most of all, Seath the Scaleless, the balding traitor dragon who turned on his own kind to join Gwyn and his buddies against the everlasting dragons. And Havel hated Seath because 1, Seath was a sorcerer, and 2, Seath was a dragon, but not just any kind of dragon. He was one without any form of integrity. He turned on his own kind, and he did all these weird mad science experiments. It made Havel sick. Now, Havel certainly had an iconic look. As a trophy from his time as a famous dragon slayer, this dude used a massive everlasting dragon's tooth as a club, something that required tremendous strength to do. Now, don't be fooled, Havel wasn't just strong, he was also smart. He didn't lock himself into one discipline. This motherfucker was cunning. He invented the magic barrier to counter Seath, which works beautifully, by the way, if you use it during the boss fight. He also invented other rock-based abilities and miracles, and led a loyal band of knights that wore similar clothes to him. One day, this poor son of a bitch was imprisoned in a tower in Darkroot by his old war buddy Gwyn for the sole crime of going hollow. For his own good, they would say, and I guess it makes sense since this guy was a heavy hitter, but some believe he was locked up for a different purpose, one that went a little something like plotting against the gods of Anor Londo. Now the reason for this theory is the mimic in the treasure room in Anor Londo. See, it has an occult club inside it, and the other chests in the room also contain Havel's armor. Occult weapons have the distinction of being able to harm the gods, and the theory basically posits that Havel basically came into possession of this club with the intention to do harm unto the gods of Anor Londo. And it suggests that it belonged to Havel because it is located in this room full of a bunch of his other belongings. And it also doesn't help that it's a club. I mean, we know Havel loved his blunt instruments. So yeah, I mean, the theory does sort of make sense because if Havel was indeed in possession of this weapon, then it could mean that yes, he was plotting something against the gods, but why? Why would he turn on his own kind? Well, I think the obvious answer would be Seath. I mean, think about it a little bit. Let's go over Gwyn and Havel's history together. So the two of them fought the dragons together, and Seath betrayed the dragons and threw in his lot with Gwyn and the other Lord Souls. This would turn the tide against the everlasting dragons, and Gwyn's allied forces did prevail. Afterwards, Gwyn broke off a piece of his soul and gave it to Seath. Seath was then honored as a duke and became a member of Gwyn's royal court, even possibly fathering some monstrosity abomination kid with his daughter Guinevere, which is, of course, the subject of heavy speculation. And to throw in my own 2 cents, I think Priscilla could just as easily be the nameless king's kid because we know he had a thing for dragons. But anyway, back to our man Dwayne. Now, Havel hated 2 things more than anything, as we established earlier: magic and dragons, and what was Seath? A literal dragon who did magic, a dragon sorcerer. And not just that, but one who had been honored and given status and power by Havel's good buddy Gwyn, and for what? As thanks for betraying his own kind and helping us win? Havel found Seath disgusting and potentially found his station to be an insult to what he and Gwyn had fought for. And not for nothing, Havel potentially has a point here, because look how Gwyn treated the humans after they assisted with the war with the everlasting dragons. They certainly didn't get any high praise or grand station in Anor Londo. No, they were given a grand city, but it was at the edge of the world and out of sight, out of mind. Definitely more of an insult and a curse disguised as a blessing compared to the actual honors and blessings he bestowed upon Seath. I mean, he literally broke off a piece of his own soul for Seath, which was something I can imagine Havel was none too pleased about. And from here, it's really not that hard to see how it could have played out. Havel sources a club, it's discovered, and he's locked away in a tower for his own good, left to hollow out in solitary. And to make it even more tragic, maybe Havel was hollowing out in the process of putting this plan together and gathering the club and, coming up with his plan of action. And when he hollowed out, they discovered what he was planning and then locked him away in a tower for his own good. I mean, that could just as easily have happened. Either way, whatever the reason, they got rid of him, and that was that for a while. Havel also had a loyal band of knightly followers called the Havel Knights. They were given rings that allowed them to wear armor like his, or at least the ability to do so, and these rings sort of carried his name through the cycles, as did the armor. At that time, the tooth itself was last seen in the possession of a fellow named Ancient Soldier Varg, who very well may be a Havel Knight, but it's sort of unclear. He was last seen with a group of grave robbers in the city of Shulva. They sort of serve as this dungeon exploration boss fight sort of experience. The weapon wouldn't remain down there forever, and by the time of Dark Souls 3, one Havel Knight would make it all the way up to Archdragon Peak and even manage to acquire Havel's famous weapon, the Dragon's Tooth. And sure, it's entirely possible that it's inexplicably the original Havel that's encountered here at Archdragon Peak, mainly because he's got the Dragon Tooth, but we last saw that in possession of a grave robber, so perhaps it's just another surviving Havel Knight that found it and made it his own, fully completing the illusion of Havel. Kind of like a Dread Pirate Robert situation, he's sort of just continuing the name. Now, what further muddies the waters on who this is the location of Havel's suit of armor on the wall of Lothric, and the soul of the nearby stray demon actually being the ring of one of Havel's knights. I mean, could this stray demon have eaten a Havel Knight, or is this stray demon literally the knight's ring? It could be something goofy like this Havel Knight was meditating Path of the Dragon style right there on the wall of Lothric to access Archdragon Peak, and he didn't notice the stray demon wandering around, or it didn't notice him. And when this Havel Knight was defeated by us on Archdragon Peak, he was kicked out of the peak and spit back to where he was sitting on the wall, only to unceremoniously get crushed and possibly partially eaten by a very old stray demon that had wandered very far from home, and that the Havel Knight clearly hadn't noticed before he sat down to meditate there, if that is what happened here. And that is, of course, baseless speculation. But whether this individual at the peak standing over that freshly slain wyvern is Havel, one of his knights, or just another imposter, one thing is somewhat clear. He appears to have either been ensnared or perhaps even entered into some kind of pact with the weird sorcerers that live here at Archdragon Peak, a fate he shares with Prince Rickard and at least one Drake Blood Knight. And in a true FromSoftian fashion, the only way to free Havel, or this Havel Knight, or imposter, or whatever the fuck he is, from his binds to this sorcerer is death. But I could talk about Havel all day, so we should probably move on to the cheat entry on this list, because she technically doesn't appear in Dark Souls 1, so this is hardly a fair entry. But she is still a Knight of the Gods, so I feel like I should mention her briefly here at the end. I'm of course referring to Shira, Seath's kid, appears in Dark Souls 3, the Ringed City, as an NPC. She helped raise the best dragon in the world, Midir, for Anor Londo. She was both a noble and a knight, and she was sent alongside the last archdragon to guard Filianor, Gwen's daughter, in the Ringed City after she was given over to the Pygmies as a sign of good faith by Gwen. Now, while they were both sent out there for a very specific duty, Midir's job was a bit different than Shira's. He was sent to consume the dark. The abyss had this spreading nature to it, and the gods figured if they had an everlasting dragon just constantly battle the abyss and eat it, then its spread would be stopped. And since dragons were everlasting, the gods patted themselves on the back and thought to themselves, case closed. Shira herself seemed to engage in abyss countering operations as well. I can imagine it was her trying to lighten the load for Midir, since she was part dragon and could see the long-term effects of his all-darkness diet. She also killed or defeated the Pygmy Lord for some reason and made a hammer out of him. Shira's devotion to her knightly duty is ridiculously solid, considering the fact that she holds the Pygmy Lord prisoner in her quiet room, stopping his dark soul from spreading until the literal end of time, at which point she immediately attacks us for somehow being responsible, because we've got a piece of the dark soul as well. She's also quite the loyal friend to Midir, as I've probably already pointed out. She asked a traveling hero to put him out of his misery, since the abyss he had spent an eternity consuming was finally starting to take its toll on the poor old dragon, corrupting him eventually completely, as we see in the boss fight, but not killing him. Ultimately, I'm not sure if he's in any kind of agony or misery. I just think that Shira knows how dangerous an abyss-corrupted archdragon would be to the world of the Age of Fire, and she knew it needed to be stopped and put down, since her loyalties ultimately lie to Anor Londo and the First Flame. She could truly believe that the corruption changed Midir, and perhaps he'd no longer respond to her, even if she tried to reach out. She could truly believe that. But ultimately, it would do little to affect her decision here in having him killed. Anyway, for my 2 cents, I'd say that he's clearly still very wily given how he stalks us across the city, so I'm not convinced that his corruption equals evil or bad or insanity or danger, really. It just equals something that opposes the force that she's been fighting for or been, told to fight for. So it's important not to take her words as straight up fact when they're clearly colored by her own allegiances. I mean, what's one thing Anor Londo wouldn't want? A dragon of all things that's now corrupted with abyss, flying around, spewing darkness everywhere. Although it is worth noting at this point there is no fucking Anor Londo anymore. It's all just...
Shadow's dust.
But anyway though, Shira rocks, and I just wanted to mention her here because I wasn't sure where else I'd get the chance. Now, I believe that was all the important knights of Anor Londo that I could think of, at least the ones from Dark Souls 1, and of course that one from Dark Souls 3. I mean, there's Leto too, but he's, not much to him. He has a cool hammer. But yeah, overall, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I was trying not to go too long with this video, and it still ended up being a half an hour, but that's fine. That's not too crazy to edit. Now, as always, I hope you guys found the video to be at least somewhat informative or amusing, and if you like the video, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it, and if you like hearing me ramble on about these various lore topics, and soon-to-be movies and TV as well, in my spare time, those videos won't be particularly edited because it's always a pain in the ass. But if you like hearing me ramble, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And if for whatever reason you feel like supporting the channel, well, I've got a Patreon that I need to remember to link in the description. And I believe I have channel memberships, but I'm not sure how all that works. Anyway, let's enough e-begging. Let's have our outro and then the iconic final thoughts, shall we? So I was thinking in this final thoughts, you guys could give me some feedback, help me out with some ideas on some Soulsbornian content that you guys would like to be seeing, because I would still like to continue doing it, but I'm sort of almost at this writer's block stage, and my brain can't really decide on what's interesting or not when it comes to that topic. I mean, a lot of it has been done, but that really doesn't matter. I mean, really, at the end of the day, everything's been done before. You just kind of have to find your groove, But that doesn't mean I'm necessarily at a writer's block for videos. Like, I have a video on the Blue Dragon that I pretty much just need to edit together. It's, from Peacemaker. I don't know how well it's going to perform, but I really just need to put these videos out. I mean, I have a couple Witcher videos that are definitely going to be coming out very soon. It kind of feels like I'm throwing stuff at a wall to see what sticks, but I'm kind of just deciding in my brain what would seem like an interesting video for me to make, what I can just throw myself into and not really be distracted by. It's really a whole thing. But anyway, there's a couple shows we all should be watching because I very likely will be covering them very soon. Pluribus is probably the obvious one, and the other one would probably be The Chair Company, but then again, there's still some other shows that I want to cover as well. It's just hard to branch off into that. Like, I wanted to do a video on the show From for a really long time because I really like that show. It's a really interesting idea, and it's got a pretty cool main character. That being said, though, I don't want to ramble off too long in these final thoughts like I've been doing lately, so I will leave you guys off there. I've been trying to keep the momentum up, so I'll be seeing, or you guys will be hearing from me very soon. But until then, everybody be safe, and yeah, I'll see ya.